Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Jeffrey Mishlove. Today, we'll be exploring the origins of medicine, particularly Western medicine. My guest is David Osborn. He is a medical astrologer, an herbalist, an acupuncturist, and the host of the website GreekMedicine.net. Welcome, David.
Yes. Welcome, Jeff.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
Yeah, nice to be with you too.
You, in fact, for benefit of our viewers, I might mention you hailed me at the Whole Foods store here in Albuquerque and introduced yourself to me, and now here you are as a guest on the New Thinking Aloud channel.
Yeah, I had seen your videos on YouTube, and so I recognized your face.
And I read your website, and truly it reads like a book. Which I like.
Yeah, well, I put a lot of time and work into that website.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I really appreciated is that you noted that you can trace the origins of Greek medicine back really even before the pre-Socratic philosophers, but one of the primary principles are the four elements: earth, air, fire, and water.
Yes.
And that comes out of pre-Socratic philosophy.
Yes. Generally, the philosopher Empedocles is the one who is credited with first developing the four-element theory. Empedocles, he was a mystic and a vegetarian, and the four elements are kind of like the core of Greek medicine.
I'm very interested in Greek medicine. As we were discussing earlier, I had a chance to visit the Asclepeion, the sleep temple on the island of Kos in Greece, which is where Hippocrates, who is regarded as the founder of Western medicine, received his training. Now, it's interesting that the founder of Western medicine received training because surely by the time of Hippocrates, medicine the ancient medicine had been around for well over 1,000 years.
Yes. Actually, you could say, when did medicine originate? Well, it must go back to the dawn of the human species. Ever since man has been around, he's been getting sick. And, trying to cure or resolve, their illness has taken every bit of ingenuity and inventiveness and intuition and, all this originally, medicine was a branch of science, and science was natural philosophy. So all traditional healing systems arise from the attempt to integrate the health and well-being of man, the microcosm, with the health and balance and well-being of the entire cosmos. All traditional healing systems are systems of balance primarily. And in Greek medicine, you have the four elements, which is fire, air, earth, and water, and your corresponding humors, which is yellow bile, blood, black bile, and phlegm, or, phlegm, the serous fluids of the body. And then you also have the four temperaments, you have choleric, sanguine, melancholic, and phlegmatic. And bringing all of those into harmony and balance was basically what Hippocrates put together when he kind of like codified or synthesized the medical knowledge that had come before him.
Mm-hmm. Now, you are also an acupuncturist, so you probably are quite familiar with the 5 elements of Chinese medicine.
Yeah, so what's going on here? You got 4 elements in Greek philosophy, and then you have 5 elements in Chinese medicine, and you have only 3 of the Chinese 5 elements correspond with the Greek elements, water, earth, and fire. And then the other 2 Chinese elements, metal and wood, are different. But even beyond that, the Greek elements, they are forces of nature, but more importantly, they're basic constituents of matter in the classical Greek worldview. Mm-hmm. Now, Chinese elements, they're called the Wu Xing in Chinese, which means the 5 goings, or they say the 5 phases of energy transformation. And implicit in the Chinese worldview is more of a kinetic or dynamic view of elements. Mm-hmm. In other words, the Chinese 5 elements are certain processes that are going on in the human body. Each of these dynamic processes, embodied in a certain internal organ, is balanced with the other organs and their elements. Mm-hmm. Whereas in Greek medicine, you have the 4 elements being equated with the 4 humors, or the 4 principal bodily fluids, which, must be balanced and harmonious to have good health.
Mm-hmm. Now, of course, that's a philosophical idea of balancing the elements, but Hippocrates came out of a temple, a sleep temple, where the practices were very ritualistic. And by that time, I imagine, even in the day of Socrates, those rituals probably go back thousands of years.
I was able to visit the Asclepion at Empedocles, which was the principal Asclepion in ancient Greece, I'm told. And from what I understand, it was quite a sophisticated system of dream healing. Mm-hmm. The people who would come for healing would be admitted to the temple, and they would go through a period of fasting and purification. It was called catharsis, and then they were counseled by the dream priests, physicians, and then they were eventually led into the abaton, which was the sleep chamber where they slept and had their healing dreams. Now,
the idea being that the god of the temple, Asclepius, would in one form or another come to them in their dreams, and that would be part of the healing process.
Yeah. And I think also there were various recreational activities designed for the participants in their theatrical plays, and there were perhaps games and athletic events as well that they could either view or they could participate in based on their ability. And I think it was also kind of like the forerunner of the health spa as well. Mm-hmm. And so the god Asclepius would appear either directly as Asclepius or in various guises, like as a dog, or as snakes were also symbolic of the god Asclepius. And many people have actually gotten answers to their problems, in dreams. Probably the most famous one was like the scientist, the chemist who dreamed of the snake grasping its tail. That
Kekulé.
Was the benzene ring. Yes.
Yeah, very famous example. But there are examples actually going back to ancient times of people solving problems in their dreams. In fact, there's a stela right at the paws of the Sphinx in Egypt, describing a dream of one of the early pharaohs who was, at the time the Sphinx was totally buried under sand, and the pharaoh was camping there, and he had a dream to dig up in this location, and the Sphinx would reveal itself, and indeed it did. So that pharaoh had this stela created.
Oh, wow.
Engraved in stone to commemorate his dream.
Wow.
So the ancients had, my understanding is across the world, whether it's India or China or Greece or indigenous peoples, they're very close to the psyche, to what you could call the soul or the depths of the mind itself. And they saw that as a resource to use for healing, and they accessed it through rituals and through dreams and through mystical practices. And I'm under the impression that no matter what culture you go to, that's how medicine originated.
Yeah. I mean, like, for example, when I was a student of acupuncture, I often wondered where the elaborate system of acupuncture meridians came from, and who conceptualized it, who thought it up. And, it could have come from many different sources that was gradually systematized, but I think it maybe included, intuitive revelation as well. In addition to empirical experience and trial and error. For example, a soldier getting an arrow shot in one place on his body would experience an amelioration of a condition in another part of his body, and so gradually this information was pieced together. And maybe with the help of medical sages who were able to meditate on it and visualize it intuitively. And, this is how the corpus of traditional healing wisdom, I think, came together.
Mm-hmm. You've also studied Ayurvedic medicine. So you're familiar with Chinese, Greek, and Indian medicine.
Yeah.
And I'm under the impression that what you see are common principles across all of those.
Yeah. I mean, you can't say that there's a direct one-to-one correspondence, between these different systems, but there are definite principles of physiology and pathology that are shared in common. For example, Chinese medicine talks about, many different pathologies of phlegm. And phlegm, is one of the 4 humors in Greek medicine. And then in Ayurvedic medicine, the phlegm corresponds to kapha. We think of kapha, cough. That's what accumulates in your lungs, especially when the weather gets cold and damp, and the cold and wet are 2 of the basic qualities of the phlegm humor. And, but for example, there are herbs that concoct or transform phlegm. These are your expectorant herbs. For example, you have one herb that started in Greece as a fenugreek herb, Trigonella fenugrecum, which means Greek hayseed. And it started out in Greece, and then it went through the Middle East when the Arabs and the Persians took over classical Greek medicine after the fall of the Roman Empire, and they called it hulba, or al-hulba, and it went all the way to China and entered Chinese medicine, where it's called huluba, which is kind of like a transliteration of hulba.
Mm-hmm.
And so, herbs basically and medicinal substances have traveled the globe, and there has always been a thriving trade in herbs and other medicinal substances. Mm-hmm. I mean, for example, your history books talk about the spice trade. Well, what these same history books may not tell you is that so many cooking spices are also used as medicines. They all have medicinal uses. And for example, if you get, indigestion or sick to your tummy, relief can be as close as your kitchen spice rack. Mm-hmm. So in addition to improving the flavor of food, these culinary spices also improve their digestibility.
And I imagine they had real commercial value even in the ancient world.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And, for example, in the case of Jesus being anointed with the spikenard oil, well, that is Indian spikenard that was imported all the way from India. That's why it was so costly. And you can get it today at an Ayurvedic herb store as Jatamansi, which is also called Indian valerian, and it has a very strong aroma like valerian root. But you can also get it in essential oil form too. Mm-hmm.
Now I know that in the Vedas,
yes,
in India, from which Ayurvedic medicine is derived,
yes,
there's a lot of emphasis on a substance called soma, which seemed to be used ritually, and it helped the aspirants achieve communion with the deities.
Yeah, well, for example, in Greece there was the Eleusinian Mysteries, mm-hmm. where they quaffed a drink called the Kykeon, which had, we are told, entheogenic properties. Mm-hmm. And I've read various things about, what was in that drink, mm-hmm. of course, which is what everybody wants to know, yep. as well as what exactly the soma plant was. And one leading candidate for its principal ingredient was the Syrian rue seed. Which is Pegamum harmala, is its Latin botanical name. Mm-hmm. And you can get these seeds in Middle Eastern supermarkets. But, they don't take the seeds internally to have a mystical experience anymore. What they do is they heat the seeds up in a skillet until a very dense smoke comes from it, and then they go around the house, kind of like smudging to purify the vibrations. Mm-hmm. But I would advise caution with anybody trying to pick up these seeds and try to get high on them, because first of all, the dosage and the preparation for taking them, I think that specialized knowledge has been lost since the Eleusinian Mysteries closed. But there was this technology of the sacred, you might call it.
Well, that's precisely what it was, a technology of the sacred. And the mystery traditions were, by the time of the height of Greek philosophy in Athens, every important citizen had to go through the Eleusinian mysteries. Mm-hmm. They were sworn to absolute secrecy. But what we know is that people who came out of that ritual all seemed to profess that they were no longer afraid of death.
Yeah.
That somehow I'm inclined to think that the ancient mystery traditions created something akin to a near-death experience. So people felt they'd visited the underworld. They understood what death was about. So they weren't afraid of it, which it strikes me as very different than our modern Western medicine, where we spend, I think, 85% or so of all medical expenses are spent in the last 3 weeks of life, trying desperately to keep people alive.
Yeah, even when they're a vegetable. And,
yeah. But if you're no longer afraid of death, you wouldn't necessarily want to spend your dollars on the last 3 weeks of life trying to prevent what seems to be inevitable.
Yeah.
In any case, what you might rather want to do with your medicine is work on increasing the quality of life.
Quality of life, yes. And, that is where a lot of natural healing systems really come in. I personally think that you can't, everybody's talking about healthcare reform these days, and that you can't really have any truly meaningful, effective reform of our healthcare system without incorporating complementary and alternative modalities of healing.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, they're very cost effective. In other words, why? And, on the other hand, there's some pharmaceutical drugs that cost more than the rent for a month's supply of medication.
Some drugs are running to hundreds of thousands of dollars annually. Which, it's wonderful to the extent that they actually work and save lives.
Yes, but, many times, there can be a traditional herb that works just as well.
Mm-hmm.
For example, in the 18th century in England, a common cure for epilepsy, or a common treatment for epilepsy was mistletoe.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked very well. It, very, very potent anticonvulsant. And, but nowadays it's hardly ever used. Of course, it's a quite potent herb, and you have to be very careful with the preparation and the dosage, and don't take it in excessive doses. But in small doses, it can be very effective in treating epilepsy. And,
well, you're an herbalist.
Yeah. Herbs are natural substances. They are endowed with life energy. Okay? And now, this life energy also translates into spiritual energy. In other words, herbs, in addition to having physiological effects, and curative and regulatory effects on important physiological functions, they can also have subtle energetic effects as well. For example, a Chinese doctor, in Chinese medicine, the whole idea of qi is very well developed. Mm. And there are many herbs that are used to regulate qi, which means to alter or direct the flow of qi in various parts of the body and in various different ways. So, for example, on the physiological level, you have the immune system. On the you translate that into a subtle energetic level, and then that becomes protection from evil spirits, evil energies, and evil entities. Mm-hmm. And in other words, but it's keeping the bodily temple, whole and protecting it from...
In other words, you're invoking the Hermetic principle here of as above, so below.
Yes.
The way the body works with its immune system, that there's, one could call it sacred anatomy, or as one of my other guests refers to it, that we have a subtle body that operates in a similar way, and that some substances like natural herbs, as opposed to artificially manufactured medicines, may impact the subtle body.
As I said, it all comes back to this Hermetic principle, mm-hmm. as above, so below. But when you get to the core of it, it's all that everything is a cosmic unity.
Mm-hmm.
what appears to be so far flung, like the planets, they're all part of that same unity that is the unity of the healthy, functioning organism of the human body.
Well, I suppose it's fair to say that the cosmology that you're expressing, this idea of the unity of the organism with the cosmos, was well accepted in virtually every ancient culture and is completely antithetical to modern Western materialism.
Yeah. I mean, basically you have analysis, which is breaking things down in its component parts, which modern science and medicine is very good at doing. Then you have synthesis, which is bringing everything together. I mean, for example, you have the Greek word for doctor, physician. In Greek medicine, there is the concept of physis, which is the organism in its totality. Which is greater than the sum of its constituent parts. They say that Hippocrates didn't know really that much about anatomy, wasn't so clear on his anatomical detail of all the constituent parts, but he had a very good grasp on the organism as a whole. And they say that the organism experiences health as a whole, the organism gets sick as a whole, and the organism recovers its health as a whole. And so a real physician was not somebody who, knew all the details. Well, the kidneys do this, and the liver does that, and the heart does this, but somebody who could put it all together and to guide, like a philosopher, to guide the patient back to health.
And it's very different from our era today of specialization, where you have doctors who will only work on bones, or doctors who will only work on the cardiovascular system, or doctors who only work on the brain and the neurology.
Somebody once said that what does MD stand for? Minor deity. So they're not making, the general practitioners are not making all the big bucks that the specialists are making, but perhaps they're underappreciated. I think maybe it may be time for general practitioners to incorporate, holistic healing modalities, especially dietary therapy and nutrition and herbal medicine under their belt.
You set up the website GreekMedicine.net because you felt people had lost touch, I think, with the basically with the origins of Western medicine.
Yeah. You can trace. The way I look at it is that each traditional healing system is a paradigm, a way of organizing physiological and pathological and therapeutic information. And in the ancient system of Greek medicine, you can see the origins of modern medicine. All that happened really was things got more detailed and more elaborate, and as scientists got out their microscopes and started to break down and elaborate on, these basic principles of physics of the organism and how it functioned, that date back to Greek medicine. For example, you have in Greek medicine of the four humors, blood, or the sanguine humor. Its main function is its vital function. Okay, and so it has an affinity for the vital faculty. And the vital faculty, what its function is to keep the organism and all its constituent parts, all its tissues and cells and organs alive from moment to moment. This is cellular metabolism is the basis of it. And blood, gives life and brings the vital principles to the cells. For example, in Chinese medicine, you talk about qi and blood, qi and blood, qi and blood. Qi being vital energy and blood. Well, in Greek medicine, they say that blood is the humoral carrier for the vital principles. So it's quite close. And then you go into a hospital. One of the first things they do is they, clip a little thing on your finger and shine a light through it. And this tells the doctor how well the blood is infusing into the capillaries and bringing all the vital principles to the cells.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about a plethysmograph, I believe it's called.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. That measures the oxygenation and the flow of blood in the fingertip.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
But it all started from, the original idea of Greek medicine that blood was the carrier of the vital principles. And it's the humor associated with the air element. And we know that we get in the pneuma or chi or prana from the air we breathe. Mm-hmm. And without it, we couldn't live, for more than a few minutes.
Which is why I think the word breath is often the same word in many different languages as the word for spirit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the book of Genesis says that God breathed into Adam and he became a living soul. Mm-hmm. So, ancient cultures have known this for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm. And it seems as if perhaps these days with so many details, you need a supercomputer to keep up with all the research that's being published every year in medicine, thousands and thousands of articles. No human being can stay on top of it anymore. We've lost touch with the basics where medicine originated. We're so lost in the details.
That's right. You can't see the forest for the trees.
Well, David Osborn, this has been a real pleasure having you here in our studio. You have a wealth of knowledge across many different dimensions. Thank you so much for being with me.
And thank you again, Jeffrey.
My pleasure. And thank you for being with us.